I am doing a second buy-side quality of earnings on the same deal. You heard that, right? A second quality of earnings on a buy-side deal. How the heck does that happen? What were my findings, and how should it matter and change the way that you do business? Buying a business is what we're going to go through today. So those are the three things you're going to learn. First off, how to happen. It is a seller's market, and that means that brokers and sellers know they have leverage over buyers because there's so many buyers in the market, and so they're able to do things that don't make sense, but the market is actually absorbing. So in this case, the client was a longtime follower of mine, wanted to use me, but the seller was like, hey, we need to use the QOE provider that I recommend. I'm okay with paying half. That's how he sweetened the pot. Of course he is on a $4 million deal, so he can pick somebody whack. So they pick somebody whack, the whack provider does the quality of earnings, and my client is sitting there looking at it, going through the fundraising process. He's gotten it through SBA. They're on their way to financing it, and he's like, I don't trust this. And I'm not betting $4 million and my whole family's financial future on this thing that the seller impacted and I think is light and isn't by my guy. So he calls me, we go back and forth. As you can imagine, paying twice is tough. But I told him, if you want the help, you got to pay. I love you. So he paid. So that's the situation that got us to here. Okay. Now, what did I find? So as soon as we got started, I said, hey, send me the quality of earnings the other person did. So he sent it on a Friday evening. And anybody who knows me knows I get up at 3 a.m. So I'm catching this at 5 p.m. on a Friday. And I don't go to sleep until 1 a.m. because immediately I see 9 different issues that the QOE provider missed that were all material risks that would have likely killed the deal and bankrupted my client because they were more than 20% of EBITDA. If you mistake on 20% of EBITDA, and or working capital, you will not have the margins to pay the SBA and you will suffer. So I go through all of these different things that they missed, and it brought me to understand a very specific thing. What people think is happening and what self-funded searchers want to believe, and the beginning of every sales call I have, hey Elliot, it's a simple business. It's just HVAC. They just install ducts in houses with these units that are from big companies. Not that complicated. I don't really need a full QOE. I need a QOE thingy, maybe, sorta. Can you do one of those? But here's the situation, and I'm articulating it through the story because this is the most distinct way to communicate it. So you're in this dinghy boat. You're a first-time searcher. You don't know much of anything, and you shouldn't. It's your first time. You're probably in your 30s or 40s. You've been professional for 20 years. In your area of expertise, you're brilliant. In this one, you're woefully and dangerously unprepared. So what you're going through is you're on this little dinghy boat, and you're going through the water, and you're saying, oh, it's fine. The world's gonna be okay to me. The seller's not lying. It's just simple business. Whether or not you go bankrupt will depend on the QOE provider you choose, and whether they see this as a small piece of ice dangling in the water that should be ignored, or this big ass iceberg that's gonna sink you like the Titanic. So my client, the first QOE the seller recommended, guess what kind of QOE provider they chose? The kind that says, oh, this is an ice cube in the ocean, man, just run that over. That's no big deal. That's what you see. But how do you die? How do you go bankrupt? How do you ruin your family's financial future is what was there. So I won't go through all 9 because none of you have time for that. But let me go through a couple. So this was a manufacturing business where the manufacturing process for these products that they make takes 2 days to 2 or 3 weeks, meaning it can start in April, end in May. And some of them are like 2 or 3 months long. And so you have this thing where you have to consider work in progress, you have to consider inventory, you have to consider margins. Okay. So what the first guy said is, oh, well, they don't have great financial controls on inventory and they don't have monthly work in progress. So we can't go deeper into margins and partial projects. We can't do the work perfectly, so we'll just ignore it. I almost fell out of my seat on that Friday. So that was the first one. So let me unpack that. So what you see is, oh, they don't do monthly work in progress. Bull swank. So this is a $4 million transaction. You mean to tell me nobody in that manufacturing facility knows on a daily basis, let alone monthly, what projects are going through and what percentage complete they are? Only a super young, silly QoE provider would even put that into a write-up. It's asinine. They just didn't press because they've never been in the manufacturing business and never been in a position to push sellers and brokers. And furthermore, because they were paid by the broker and the seller and the buyer, they're in a catch-22 position anyway. So maybe the structure of this put them in that place. But for you as a buyer, it doesn't matter if the structure or the whack QoE provider put you in the poorhouse. I don't think it matters. So they don't check work in progress monthly. Oh, no big deal. It's simple business. No. So what happens is you have 10 projects that are going on and you say all 10 projects are 90% done and that 90% of the material has already been put through those projects. And when the buyer buys the business, you find out that they were 30 to 40% done and only 10% of the materials were put into them. And so you have an EBITDA issue and you have a working capital issue. So day one, you're gonna have to pay for 70% of these projects to finish. That's probably 10% of EBITDA just in that one transition. And then that $200,000 working capital line is gonna get eaten up right then by doing it. So which is just, they don't do monthly work in progress, which is baloney. What happens is EBITDA and working capital are off. Okay. Second thing, they didn't have great inventory controls at all. So with a lot of these businesses that have been operating for 20 years, they bought inventory 20 years ago, 18 years ago, 3 years ago, and some of it's never sold. Now, in the year that they're selling, what they want to do is say that all that inventory is good and that all of it was purchased recently, or what they often do is like, oh, I don't know when it was purchased, so I don't know if it's obsolete or not. And for most QoE providers that are lazy, they just let it ride because it's a lot harder to interpolate and create a best use list of how long the inventory's been there. The easier thing to say is they don't have great inventory controls. They don't have great inventory controls. The iceberg below that's gonna sink your ship tells you that in a manufacturing business where cost of goods sold is heavily made up of inventory that moves, the actual physical portion of the metal product or the widget. When you say you don't have good inventory controls, what you're saying is, I can't tell you for sure whether 40% of this project was raw materials or 60% was raw materials because I cannot tell you definitively how much inventory I bought, how much I put into the products, how much I still have. All you can see is how much I still have. All the historical stuff is wavy. But if I'm selling a business and know I'm getting 4 times EBITDA, what do I do with the waves? Oh man, we have a smaller proportion of our product that's raw materials than everybody else in the market because we're smarter, engineers are better. Our 10-person manufacturing business in Philly has the market leading efficiency in materials into the product. Ship hits iceberg, Titanic occurs. Third thing that I'm gonna talk about today is that the seller had a competing business that they were going to carve out. The big thing this year has been that sellers have been realizing that buyers are in a rush and that a lot of these lawyers will just rubber stamp anything. And they've been saying, well, can I sell a business for $4 million and then start it again? Because the 30-year-old buyer's gonna have to go fight me in court in a county where I know all the people that run the courts. I voted for them, we hang out together. Non-competes don't hold up all that well in court. So I'm gonna sell it for $4 million and then recreate the business and have a $4 million business. So not only defraud the person out of 4, but still keep my cash flow. So the seller had another business that served another in-use market. The problem with that is in the purchase agreement where you actually do a non-compete, legal documents require you to name entities that you're gonna carve out of the non-compete. Well, As soon as he carves out the other entity that serves another end-use market, that whole entity is protected. But today it doesn't compete in the same end-use markets. But the day after the business sells, guess what they're gonna do? Compete in the same end-use market. So when you go to court, you're gonna say, well, he's competing with me in products and services that he said he wasn't gonna do. But the seller's gonna say, it's inside this entity that I carved out of the non-compete. And so I pushed the buyer very hard that they needed to get a much better M&A lawyer to do a way more extensive non-compete. But on that Friday night where I'm looking at all of these mistakes, I named 3, there were 9 in total. The thing was, how often do people call me and tell me, well, Elliot, it's a simple business, simple in and out. I've looked at the bank statements, it's all good. And what I realized is not just if you don't do a QOE are you subject to this, but if you pay what I'll call a community college QOE provider or a cheap QOE provider, what they're gonna tell you is, oh, we just see this little ice cube in the ocean, no big deal, run over it. When you hire someone that knows what they're doing, I'm not the only one, but I certainly know what I'm doing, we're gonna tell you what is this big old iceberg that's under the water that's gonna sink you like the Titanic. And the issue is, when you want things to be simple, you have confirmation bias. But if you're betting not only your financial future, but your wife's, your kids, money has taken you 15, 20 years to amass, you wanna save $5,000 and get a guy that only sees above the water? I can't answer that question for you, but if you've made it this far, I think you know the answer.